please leave the meeting. And I think that should be it. And then we're into the slide set, please, Katrina. Next slide, please. Right. Oops. We got to the end already. That's good. Okay. Bear with us a second, please. Yeah. If you can turn cameras off, that would be useful. Thanks. Cheers. Right. This morning's agenda is actually covering energy efficiency, fuel switching, resource efficiency. It'll make more sense as we go through this morning's session, and we've actually got some speakers this morning, other than myself, to help the session along. That's Eoin Bailey from Celsa, who'll be looking at the resource efficiency, circular economy aspects. Peter Martin from the Clydach nickel refinery, Vale. He'll be sort of looking at how site can progress to zero carbon. And Eoin will come back in at the end just to sort of give people and share some experiences on a recent IETF success, and we'd like to share that. So it's how we can actually support the members of SWIC going forward, maybe attract funding as well. Off to the side, there is actually an animation. We won't be playing it today, and the YouTube link should be shortly copied into the chat. I can see that going in now. Next slide, please. Yeah, that why be efficient? It is actually such an obvious question, but we thought we'd actually start with that question. South Wales has no large-scale offshore storage. When we started looking at how we're going to get towards net zero, the obvious thing for us is how do we actually get down to the lowest possible CO2 residual so that we can actually minimise the amount of shipping or pipelines that we'll need to access other storage around the UK or even beyond. Reducing the level of CO2 actually will also make us more efficient, and we will move towards alternative local clean energy sources. In reality, it will be a cheaper option for the taxpayer. Bearing in mind increased energy prices recently, that's probably a good position. The base business models, as they emerge, that we will be testing demand side use scenarios against those business models to actually see whether it actually helps us reach a zero position, or actually are we stuck in this 70-80% area, which some of the early thinking was probably more focused around. So moving towards net zero is actually a bit of a game changer, and we want to make sure that South Wales in particular is actually taking advantage of those opportunities. I think somebody's got the mic on. Okay. I'll carry on. Yeah, South Wales, as we said, hasn't got an easy route, and therefore what we want to do is some of our sites really want to make early movements towards net zero, and those early movements do actually include things like energy efficiency and local fuel switching. This will ultimately, as I said before, result in less burden on the taxpayer and actually less burden on future generations. And future generations is an underlying theme for Wales, which has got the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. Next slide, please. We typically use the 5 steps of decarbonisation to guide our thinking in South Wales. The early steps are the steps that we just mentioned. However, in practice, a lot of our sites, industrial sites, have been looking at energy efficiency for decades. So the actual scope in that area is probably quite limited, around 7 to 10%. That's ignoring the current financial price hike that's going on. However, those that are looking at things like waste heat recovery, that's probably where one of our last areas of potential does lie. It's usually a little bit more challenging. It's not a straightforward application on our unique processes. We haven't got lots of the same types of factory facilities in South Wales, so we do actually need to think about applications, which is why waste heat recovery is probably a little bit more difficult. We also want to look at the fuel switching and future hydrogen conversions. At the moment, those will have some challenges. There is more water content, say, in the gases, which normally wouldn't be a problem if it was complete hydrogen. When you're looking at blending things like that, you've actually got 20% hydrogen. That'll put substantially more water into that exhaust gas, which with CO2 will create a carbonic acid. So there's things like that that we've just got to be aware of and actually make sure we just design into our thinking. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah. Okay. The types of projects that we've sort of been looking at on energy efficiency, a little bit small on the left, but there's a couple of programs that have been going on in the South Wales project. There's a project called Both Eyes Wide Open, which has actually been looking at energy efficiency and resource efficiency. That report will be coming out shortly. I just extracted one small table from that project. So it's sort of looking at how we can look at electrical savings. You've got usual variable speed drive. There are existing CHP systems, for instance. How do we move those to hydrogen or hydrogen blend? What are the problems there? So there's a whole variety of energy efficiency projects that we'd like to probably get moving very rapidly, especially for those sites that are not part of the deployment project, which David Jukes from Costain will explain in a session this afternoon. Reason for that is those sites will probably be the larger site, extra large sites will be the first sites that can access the shipping and actually get CO2 away from South Wales, where the larger medium sites, the residual sites, will need to actually move in these early steps of decarbonisation on its pathway to net zero. So one of the common issues that we've found is for this approach is waste heat recovery does seem to be a common potential cost saving for most sites, as well as it's actually decarbonising the difficult to utility of heat, basically. One thing that we're struggling with on the industrial sites is a lack of resource within the industrial sites. It does tend to lead for a like-for-like replacement. And what SWIC is now beginning to do is just create that platform where specialist expertise or ideas can be shared. So it's actually just easing the burden in that resource constrained area. We tend to feed back to all forms of government, Welsh government, UK government, etc. And we're looking at their support schemes to see whether they can be just tweaked or how we can apply them effectively to support our industries in South Wales. I've mentioned the three main projects, all three SWIC project leads. That's David Jukes from Costain leading deployment, Hannah Watts from ERM leading the both Eyes Wide Open project, and myself on cluster plan. We're acting as collection points for the needs of industry and actually how we can get things like funding support, expertise back out to the industry members. Next slide, please. Yeah, an example of a heat exchange system. Some of you may have seen this example before, apologies. But actually, there's quite an old furnace that you can see there. The heat exchanger aspect was installed in 1985. It was assumed because the low preheated air performance, or it was low, that it was just fouled or leaking. Actually, when a comprehensive review was undertaken, it was found out that there was lots of air leakage into the exhaust system. This meant that in practice, it was just a change of performance conditions on the heat exchanger that was causing the lower preheated air temperature, which lowered the savings of that heat exchanger. The heat exchanger performance over 30 years had only dropped by 2-3%. So it's not necessarily that old is bad, it's just have your conditions changed. So there's a whole raft of things that this actually started to bring out. So the simple thing was a like-for-like replacement was their first option. What has actually happened, if we go to the next slide, please. We actually created a new design for the heat exchanger because we accepted the lower input temperature, and basically we had to increase the size, which meant that the fact that we ended up with the higher temperature, which you can see on the top graph, and actually achieved quite significant savings. The funding was a problem, and in this case, the Welsh Government helped out with partial funding of the project, and it was quite a successful project. Next slide, please. So the lessons were lack of time, resources, expertise can lead to a like-for-like replacement. The thorough investigation has actually helped the specification provide the required outcomes in all circumstances, and the access to the funding did unlock that project after sitting there for more than 5 years. Next slide, please. The challenge on that furnace is actually now looking at the options for the future on fuel switching. I'll probably come to that later in this session. Next slide, please. And at this point, I'll actually hand over to Eoin Bailey, who will talk about the resource efficiency and circular economy.
Thank you, Tony. While we get my slides pulled up, just my name is Eoin Bailey. I'm the Innovation Manager for Celsa Steel. We're a steel manufacturing company based in Cardiff, and we have a remit to deliver steel for the construction sector throughout the whole of the UK. I have another more slides later on, so I'll explain a bit more about who we are and what we do. But for this session, I just want to talk to you about circular economy. I want to, I suppose, give you a bit of an insight into what the circular economy actually is and how it can be relayed and utilized within your own business for prosperity and for profit. If I go straight into the first slide, please. So before I start talking about the circular economy, I'd like to just have a couple of minutes to talk about the linear economy. So to make people aware that what we do today, our whole social and economic structures are based upon a linear process where we extract raw materials from the Earth's environment, from the natural environment. We make something with those materials. We move them around the planet, and we use to sell them, and we use them for a short period of time, and ultimately we waste them. And everything we do in society is focused on this process. And the only time there's any assumed value in anything we do in this process is when we sell something. So this ultimately has caused us to have an addiction to this linear economy. And this linear economy is a mindset that's been around for over 3 million years. As soon as humans started to stand upright and take stone and sticks from the environment to make tools and weapons to go hunting, that's a linear economy. So really, it's been around a long time, and everything we've done ever since, including the industrial revolutions in terms of mechanization, automation, and now digitalization, it's still this similar mindset. So when we talk about decarbonisation and low carbon technologies, and we talk about, for example, Elon Musk in his electric vehicles, we have to remember that these are still designed, manufactured, and delivered within the context of a linear economy. So we will end up having waste at the end of those lives. So we need to be careful what we see to be positive and good for the environment without really understanding the full life cycle. It's very difficult to have a clear vision of what can happen. So if we move on to the next slide, please. So what we're trying to do is get to a future where the future is circular. The future is about prosperity. And in the simplest terms, circular economy is about eliminating the concept of extraction of raw materials from the planet and eliminate the concept of waste. Waste in a circular economy does not exist, and in essence, waste is just bad design. So what we want to get to is an economy which utilizes all the resources we have a lot more effectively, making sure that the energy we put into those industrial processes, it comes from a renewable source, and design systems that can allow us to look at the full life cycle and design in the most optimal use of those resources throughout that life cycle. One of the ways we can remind ourselves of what the circular economy actually is, it's a mimicking of natural systems. Nature doesn't produce any waste. It produces food for new life. So what we're trying to do is take that principle and relate to industry and effectively have a technical metabolism, which ultimately creates feedstock for new development. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do and what we can do across the board when we start looking at the world around us through the lens of a circular economy. Next slide, please. So just very quickly to give you some practical example of what this means. So Celsa as a business, and again, like I said, I'll go through some more detail on Celsa in the next session. Celsa is a steel producer. We use electric arc furnace to process our steel, but we use scrap as the primary feedstock. So 100% of our feedstock is coming from scrap material, which is effectively the end of life resources that come from existing industries and existing products. So we take that scrap, we melt it down, we create product coming from that, which goes to our downstream operations, which we fabricate into an assembly, and then that goes onto construction sites. So what we're currently doing is we're delivering this recycled steel into the UK economy, but it's all based upon the process of a linear economy. So the other thing we have to consider every day is that the UK exports the majority, over 80% of the scrap resources that we produce in the UK. So as a business, we have to battle on the global market to keep those resources in the UK. So we process over 1.2 million tons a year. So we have to battle on that global market to keep it in. The other thing about the linear economy, which I didn't speak about earlier, is the fact that we only get paid once. Everyone gets paid once in the linear economy, whereas circularity gives you more options to get paid and get value over the entire life cycle of something. So what we're decided to do is look at what we have as a business. And if we go on to the next slide, please. So what we're looking at is taking not looking at too much change in our business, but actually just changing our mindset about what we have, what capabilities we have. So we have an electric arc furnace which can melt on a yearly basis 1.2 million tons of scrap to produce 1 million tons of product that goes into the economy. So what we're looking at is offering that whole process as a service solution to the wider construction industry, to the wider industry, so that we can start to develop this concept of collaboration, and that as an industry supply chain, we can start working together to maximize the value of the resources that we have available to us within that supply chain. So in essence, what we're trying to do is work as a collaboration to address those hard to abate Scope 3 emissions that everyone is finding it difficult to even comprehend how we can start to reduce. But by processing the waste from the demolition phase of a construction project, we're actually dealing with the Scope 3 emissions of that construction company. And then therefore by delivering that same material processed into the new build for that construction company, we are dealing with the Scope 3 of the resources they're purchasing. So therefore, as a collective, we're tackling a lot of things. So we are looking at maximum resource efficiency across either a project or a region, all based upon the principles of circularity. Next slide, please. So one of the ways we've piloted this project already, which is with BAM Construction and the Plaza Cinema in Port Talbot. And this happened very, very easily over, we had a discussion over a cup of coffee and I asked the question, is there any scrap coming from the demolition phase of the Plaza Cinema? To the answer was yes, and therefore we went about finding out how can we best get that material coming through a circular supply chain. So the starting point of this was really as simple as just changing the name on the waste transfer note, and that material started to be delivered to Celsa site in Cardiff. We processed the scrap steel, and we delivered the new product with that material to the new site for the ground. So the reinforcement steel in the groundworks is the same steel effectively that's been circulated. So we've started to close the loop. So not only is this a really good story to be able for BAM and ourselves to be able to tell, but it in terms of the practical applications and implications of this, it's starting to build up an idea of how circular economy is delivering those tangible results. And what we're looking to do is offer this as a platform for circular service. So utilizing what Celsa has as a service can add those benefits to the wider supply chain. Next slide, please. And so this has benefits for all. So a collaborative future, which is based upon circularity, has a multiple of opportunities for value. And this isn't like, so we're moving on beyond the point of which we get paid once for our activities, our efforts. We're actually looking at how we can generate value amongst ourselves, amongst the collaboration. So I won't go into all of the details here, but one of the things that stands out from this initiative is that the areas around Scope 3 emissions that we can only deliver as a collaboration. Next slide, please. So I'll just leave you with this. So whatever you're doing in your industry, always think full life cycle, because stuff doesn't disappear. There's always something. There's always boundaries in which we design and develop our solutions. So we need to extend those boundaries, and extend the focus. Waste is just bad design. So let's redesign the system that where waste doesn't exist. And the big thing here is collaboration is key, because circularity is definitely a team sport. So thank you for that, and that's my slide finished. I would like to pass you on now to, sorry, if you want to add any questions or have any questions, just stick them in the chat and we can answer them in due course. I'd like to take the opportunity now to introduce you to Peter Martin from Vale, who's going to talk to you about some of the systems and projects that they're working on there. Thank you.
Thank you, Eoin. I'll just wait for my slide to come up. I'm Peter Martin. I'm the technical manager here at Vale in Clydach, and we're a nickel refinery. So once the slides come up. There you go, cool. So yeah, just a few slides first, just a bit about meeting Vale. So it looks like Vale, but it's actually pronounced Vale. So the next slide. So we're a global mining company. So having just followed Eoin's a bit about taking stuff out of the ground, yeah, we do take things out of the ground. So we're a large mining company, headquartered out of Brazil. We're part of the base metals group, and we're headquartered out of Toronto. So there's about 115,000 people, and our operation extends across 5 continents. We're one of the largest producers of both iron ore and nickel, but we also have coal and copper as well. So we have quite a large, extensive portfolio. Vale as a whole produces around 20% of the world's nickel supply, and this is obviously used in construction, stainless steels, aerospace, but it's also been increasingly now used in EV vehicles and that electrical revolution as well. And we at Clydach play quite a critical role in the high quality nickel. Next slide. So that was Vale. So we come back to Clydach Nickel Refinery, where we are here, just north of Swansea. We actually started production in 1902, so we've been here for 119 years, so it'll be 120 years next year. So we have a lot of history of nickel here and of processing it. We use the nickel carbonyl process, and that's the same basic reaction that's been used from the very start here. How we use it and our kit has changed over the years, but the process here is based on that equation, and that was found by Ludwig Mond in the late 1800s, and then he built this site here. We've also been producing and using hydrogen for over 50 years on site, so it's one of our main process gases. We have 193 employees on site, and we make around 40,000 tons of nickel a year, and it's 99.9% pure, so it's very high purity nickel. Our main products are nickel pellet and powder, and we run a 365-day-a-year operation, 24 hours a day, so we're a continuous operation. And we sell to over 280 customers in over 30 countries. Mainly pellets end up in Europe. About half our powder ends up in Asia, in China and Japan, and we do sell a small amount into the US as well. But our sister plant in Canada is main focus for that marketplace. Next slide. So Vale, obviously, we're a mining company, and we're looking now to change our path to society and to really drive forward the commitments to make it a sustainable business and a sustainable world. So we are committed as a company to reach carbon neutrality and to fill that role in creating a sustainable world for future generations. And as you can see, our mission below is there designed to transform natural resources into prosperity and sustained development. So what we're looking at as a site, we've committed to the Paris Agreement, and we are committed to reducing our emissions by 33% as a company from 2017 levels by 2030, and a 15% reduction in our supply chain as well, those Scope 3 emissions by 2035. We're then also looking at reaching net zero carbon by 2050 as a company. As you can see there, also we have targets around 100% self-generation of clean energy globally, and that's around by 2030. And we've also then got measures around replanting and afforestation. We have a lot of sites in Brazil, so that's where a lot of that comes from. So it's reforesting, putting the Amazon, etc., around there. And also we're looking to reduce new water collection or consumption by 10% as well. So again, limiting our use of resources locally to where we operate. And the company, we've pledged at least $2 billion US to invest over the next 5 to 10 years to achieve these goals. And this at the time was the largest investment ever undertaken by a mining company to tackle climate change. And also I think they've even increased that now by another 2 billion potentially. So there's a lot of money being put into this path society and to make Vale a greener and more sustainable future. Carry on, next slide. So that was Vale. So what are we doing at Clydach? So we're a small site within Vale, but we really want to lead the way in sustainable operations. So we are looking at low carbon methods for generating our process gases. This is our hydrogen and carbon monoxide, and also our power and heat to site. So our main emissions are coming from those sort of process gases and some heat applications. So we're looking at ways to decarbonize that. We've set our own targets, and we're looking to reduce our GHG emissions on site by more than 60% by 2030. So as part of this, we'll be using those 5 steps that Tony talked around the energy efficiency and fuel switching, and then looking at smart networks and CCU and CCS. So we are looking quite aggressively to reduce our emissions. We are looking to drive below carbon neutrality at some point, so before 2050. So we see as a site that we've got an opportunity maybe to get below carbon neutrality with the right carbon capture systems. And if that can help Vale's goal then as a whole to get to carbon neutrality across the globe, So we really want to lead that way and try and drive that way. And I've always felt it's not just about carbon neutrality, which can be an accounting method. I'd love to get the site to emission-free, and that's what we want to strive to, and what we'll target is emission-free. It'd be great by 2050 or before this site was sat here producing nickel with no emissions to the environment in either water or CO2 or anything else. And that's really what I'm striving for, and as a site we're striving for. And if we aim for that, we've got a real chance of getting there. Other things we've done on the site as well is we're looking to eliminate water extraction to zero and reduce our emissions to river by over 80% within the next year as well. So we're not only doing GHG, we're looking at that water and trying to reduce that as well, again, as part of that zero emission element. And talking to the sort of circular economy, although we do dig the nickel out of the ground at the moment, another element we're looking at to try and achieve it is how we can then become part of the ever-growing battery and EV recycling market. Our process is very good at taking nickel out of mixed metals, so we're hoping we can get involved in the recycling of batteries and then turn this site into that more circular economy and become part of that zero waste for the greater community and society. Next slide. What else are we doing around that? So as we go through all those 5 steps, there comes a point where you can get your carbon emissions down to as low as possible with fuel switching, etc. But there's always going to be some CO2. So what we're looking for now is how do we utilize that, or what we do with that. So one of those projects we're looking at now is we've been working with Swansea University and the Rice group on two demonstrator projects. One is looking at growing algae with industrial CO2. So we have a small demonstrator algae farm that is now taking our CO2 emissions, growing algae, and then they're going to look to extract high quality proteins and pigments from that algae. So part of the demonstrator is showing how you would operate one of these farms with an industrial partner, and then what can come from that. The other project then is looking at generating hydrogen from solar and wind, so making a truly green hydrogen with zero carbon emissions. At the moment, we have quite a large steam methane reformer to generate hydrogen, so we're looking at other options around that. And we're demonstrating that, and again, demonstrating how that hydrogen can be used in our industrial process. So these are 2 small-scale demonstrators at the moment, but I think really crucial to going forward in our plans to get to that zero emission point. And I think that's my last slide. So I'd be handing back to Tony.
Thanks, Peter, for that. Whilst the next slide's coming up, it's basically an introduction to the funding landscape. The landscape's extremely busy, as you can see. Probably the event in Glasgow, COP26, has probably really got something to sort of answer for. There's been a plethora of support schemes, which is great, but it's actually potentially overwhelming some of our under-resourced industrial facilities. What we I'm not going to go through all the different schemes on this slide. If people want to actually contact SWIC afterwards, that would be quite useful, quite good, and we'll sort of take things forward from there. What I will probably do now is hand over to Eoin Bailey again, who Celsa basically have applied for an IETF phase 1 project and was successful in that application. So we thought, rather than talk about the funding landscape in general, we would actually use a case study and just see how that went and what some of the challenges were. So at this stage, I'll pass over to Eoin for.
Hi, Tony. Thank you very much, and hello everyone again. We could just move on to my first slide of this next session. I can bear with us. Okay, so Tony asked me to put some things together, just to give an outline of the, I suppose, the experience and the process in which we we went through to access and to benefit from the IETF funding, and just to give people just a bit more insight into what we had to do to make this happen. Also, I'll just give you a little bit more information about who Celsa is, just in case anyone doesn't know who Celsa is. So if we go to the next slide, please. So I mentioned earlier on that Celsa is a steel manufacturer, but we're also actually the UK's largest recycler, because we recycle 1.2 million tons of scrap steel every year, which effectively means that our steel is 100% recyclable. Well, actually, sorry, it's 98% recyclable, because we do have to add a few little things just to make sure that the specification of the steel is up to par. But 100% of our scrap is sourced from the UK, which means that we're providing this we feel a valuable service back into the UK economy to help kind of generate the value back in. Celsa is a family-owned business. It's owned by a Spanish family. Francisco Rubialta set the business up in I think the 1960s, and he had a vision to make steel sustainably, and he always felt that the electric arc furnace was the way of doing so. So we have Celsa as a group we have 9 electric arc furnaces throughout the UK and Europe, and so therefore we have an ambition to we already are a very low carbon steel producer, and you can see some of the details from our current EPD and in comparison to other steel producers in Europe and the rest of the world. But we have an ambition for net zero, and we have a lot of activities in place to help us get there, and ultimately the stepping stones and the project that we engaged with the SWIC and therefore IETF is one of the first projects to help us head towards and reach that pathway to net zero. Next slide, please. So Celsa as a business, Celsa Group as a business in the UK, we have quite a few different sites across the UK. So I mentioned earlier on that we recycle scrap. So we have a couple. We're very good at, well, we're starting to become very good at integrating with our supply chain, virtually integrating with that supply chain. So we're starting to develop more scrap processing facilities, and so the sites you see in purple are the ones we have at the moment. We have the head office and the manufacturing facility in Cardiff, where the electric arc furnace and the 2 rolling mills. So we take the scrap, we melt it down with the furnace, and we create billets from that molten steel, and then those billets are rolled into different types of product, from rod and bar in the rod and bar mill in along Castle Works in Cardiff, and then the section mill, which produces angled and unequal angle and flat sections. So the rod and bar mill effectively produces material that will be part of concrete reinforcement, and we have a downstream operations where those materials are taken and cut, bent, and fabricated into products that go onto construction sites. Next slide, please. One of the biggest, little bit about you can see the impacts we have on the economy, and that information has been taken from a report that was done, I think, in 2018. But one of the things that's key to our continual development and our ultimately our sustainability is the concentration we have on skills and making sure that we have the right skills coming through. Now, I think that's a challenge for everybody. It's a challenge for most industries within SWIC, where there's gaps in the number of jobs we need to, number of positions we need to fill, and the skills that are appropriate for those positions. So we're very much into making sure that we can be a part of that training scheme to get the right people in the right position. And again, this is part of our kind of ambition overall, to make sure that as we decarbonize, we also have the right skills in that, and ultimately to fulfill the commitments that we feel we have to be a part of, as to address the goals of the Future Generations Act. Next slide, please. We do engage with the wider community, but again, we can always improve upon this. So we're currently engaged with communities around Cardiff, with the localities, the school, Willows High School, which is located very close to Celsa. And we're also making commitments now towards our wider ambitions and our wider responsibility. So we've signed up to the UN Global Compact. And so therefore any initiatives that we put in place going forward will be looking at the the UN Sustainability Goals, the 17 goals that exist, and how we can address and deliver on those goals going forward. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the project that we undertook, well, the project that we're undertaking now, the funding that supported this project. So some of the reasons being, but the electric arc furnace is quite a major draw on the national grid supply, and we wanted to make that draw as stable as we possibly could, and to protect the local supply. Because we utilize scrap material, those different components, different materials melt at different speeds, so therefore there's going to be the draw on the electricity supply is going to be fluctuating, and therefore the harmonics need to be somehow addressed. That addressing those harmonics is really going to help us deliver on the continual projects on the that we have in our pathway, and therefore help us reach that net zero target. It will help us improve the overall productivity of the process, so therefore help us to improve the amount of resources that we can redeliver back into the UK economy. And we've already, in the early stage assessments, we've already understood that there's going to be quite significant savings, both in terms of cost and value, but also in terms of energy and CO2. Next slide, please. So just the project is known as the SVC, so Static VAR Compensator, which ultimately, like I said before, addresses the harmonics and what we call flicker into from the draw from the national grid. But we can also improve a lot about the quality of that energy supply, and also the quality of the process that we can deliver the steel making process in. We've gone through a series of assessments and understanding with our procurement team, and we've decided upon Hitachi ABB as the best option for that supply. So at the moment we're currently going through the project where ABB are working with Celsa to make sure we get this project delivered on time within the budget of the project itself, within the IETF project. Next slide, please. Just this is really just to demonstrate or to highlight how we couldn't have made this possible without the connection and the collaboration we have with SWIC and the SWIC network. They were able to give us a lot of information, help us understand really what it is we need to do. We're able to offer us that fresh pair of eyes on our process. I think it's common in industry that we get very, very close to what we do, and we're very good at putting our head down and concentrating on delivering solutions internally, whereas we realized a lot more that the more we engage externally, the more we have a wider view on what's possible. So that's certainly something that's we felt as part of the SWIC initiative and the SWIC network. We're starting to get a lot more knowledge on that, and helping us again to frame what it is we need to do to get towards net zero. Also, it's helping us to understand and deliver some of the opportunities and share some experiences around circular economy, and ultimately what that means not only for Celsa as a business, but for the Welsh and UK economy, and how that ultimately we don't necessarily have to change everything. We just need to tweak what we already have, and actually we can open the scope of what we focus on now to include a larger opportunity. Next slide, please. Again, just to reiterate that this is something that we wouldn't have done on our own. We had to, based upon our economic position at the moment, based on the fact we drew down a loan from the UK government with the Project Birch during COVID. We realized if we wanted to move anything else forward, we need to get some support, and not only has IETF and Innovate UK helped us to bring in the funding, but it's also given us some structure to help us move things forward, and to develop the opportunity around collaboration, which has really helped us as well. Next slide. So this slide is just the last couple of slides, just to indicate what the approach we took. So obviously engaging with SWIC and highlighting, they were able to highlight to us the existence of the IETF fund, and help us then to understand how we could fit that into our strategic vision for what we need to do to get towards net zero. By the backing of the SWIC, it wasn't necessarily just me or any individual within Celsa saying this is something we could or should do. It was actually having those other industries saying that these are things we can do together, and it's just allowed us really to frame the narrative of how we can realistically get us to net zero and making it more real, because it's sometimes the idea of net zero is a pipe dream, but we've now started to realize, and very, very quickly, that it's a reality that we're happy and eager to deliver upon. Just last thing, the whole process in terms of engaging with SWIC. We also started, just one more thing, we engaged with Welsh Government, and Welsh Government offered or helped us out with some feasibility studies at the early stage and some funding for those as well. So it's worth mentioning that they're also a valuable resource available to those industries in South Wales or in Wales. But the whole process itself took 3 months to go through, and we were fortunate that we had a positive response when the results of the call came out in February this year. And I think that's my last slide. And so thank you. I think I'm handing back to Tony now.
Yeah, I'll just sort of, when Katrina manages to bring up the next slide, just quickly go through some of the range of demand side equipment. Demand side is just our operating sites. You can actually see that I've used some of the example of the people giving talks today, just so that that's okay. We've actually got quite antiquated equipment on a lot of our sites, so bringing that equipment up to the sort of control standards is a bit of a challenge to cater for the switch from natural gas to hydrogen. So that'll sort of be one issue. Just converting like for like, the resources issue seems to be a common theme. Most of our industrial sites have been stripped back on their process teams. So actually looking at how those changes will happen and what the flame temperatures are different on hydrogen and natural gas, so it tends to give a slightly different thermal output to the various processes, but in reality it's just saying we almost have to treat our high temperature processes probably as individual processes. This is not like domestic boilers that we can almost convert one or two and then we've got a model to roll out millions. In this case, you can see the one process on the left. There are 2 of those units there, and they're the only 2 units in the UK. So in actual fact, we haven't got a huge amount of replication, precise replication. Next slide, please. Just to quickly summarise, as just stated, the resources does seem to be an issue that we've got to try and get round, and actually SWIC sharing experiences, supporting each other, even knowing the right experts. If you're looking at the example that Eoin gave, that electrical expertise is quite specialist, so actually knowing where to get that, at least other SWIC members in that same position can actually come back to that. Why have we got to have probably the thinking when we look at those projects going forward? We actually don't want to spend money and regret that we spent it. This space is changing quite rapidly and there's new technologies coming in. And again, that's where SWIC should actually help sort of navigate the pathways that each of the sites are looking at. The varied businesses, we have a huge number of businesses in South Wales. the larger sites in particular, Peter's been on from Vale. Vale's the only nickel refinery in the UK. Celsa is an electric arc furnace, so we've got 3 steel companies in South Wales, all completely different products. So in actual fact, they are very varied. There are some common challenges, principles, and what we're starting to do is extract those challenges, principles out and actually share them for the greater good, basically. What we have also realised, Eoin alluded to it, we do need to take early steps. There was a lot of target setting last year where everybody was trying to go for net zero at the earliest possible date, probably with limited pragmatic solutions to back that up. That's what SWIC is currently looking at through its various projects. So what we're trying to do is actually encourage even those sites that are not included in the projects directly, encourage them to actually look at certain potential improvements in carbon using that 5-step approach. What we're very keen on doing is actually leaving the door open when we use that phrase quite a bit. So we've got to have a long-term vision, but actually make these early steps that are complementary to that long-term vision, so that we again, that there's a lot of uncertainty out there and risk, and people that could be holding back some investment. So we want to actually understand how we do that and how our processes within the sites can then fit with that wider SWIC infrastructure being developed, especially through the deployment project, which David Dukes Acosta is chairing this afternoon, especially on CCUS. I'll stop at that point so we could stop sharing screens, and if there's any questions from the flora, that would be useful.
Hi, yes, no problem. So I've been keeping an eye on the meeting chat, and if any of you do have questions that you'd like to add to the chat, please do, and I'll come to them. We have had a couple of questions that have been answered already, so thank you very much to those who have. But we've got one question here from Darren James, and he's asking, how do we engage with some of these companies to offer support and our knowledge from a cluster perspective? So I guess aimed at Tony in particular, how can more companies get involved with helping from a knowledge perspective and realistically a technology perspective?
I think we've got a slight issue. SWIC isn't actually a legal entity at the moment. It's yet to be fully funded as an entity. So what you're seeing at the moment is actually an ad hoc collection of people, hopefully quite professionally in what they do. But what we're proposing between now and Christmas, which is what, fingers crossed, when that entity will arise, is that we actually want to use a series of workshops similar to this SWIC Week. So SWIC Week is really an introduction to SWIC and some of its activities. So if we can actually organise some individual workshops, that's where we propose to actually bring people into the SWIC fold as such and get them set up for when we're properly organised. Hopefully that answers it, Flora.
Thank you very much, Tony. And yeah, so a reminder for anyone else who's got any other questions, then please do add them to the chat. But one question I have that's, I guess most industrial sites have, especially if they've not sort of start to begin looking at decarbonising or getting to net zero, is sort of where in the industrial site would you look first for energy efficiency as the sort of first step in making the decarbonisation, achievable? I'm not sure if that could go to any one of you in particular. How do you start almost?
It looks as though the others have put the mute on, but I'll start it and then pass it over to Peter, I think. So you tend to look at, as most things, a lot of people use, we do an audit of a site and they'll go through it quite logically and meter things. Occasionally that can be quite a lengthy process. Some of our sites, say, have hundreds of electricity or gas meters on the sites, so it can actually take a very long time just to even collect the data. However, when you're looking at sites, sometimes you get you can almost spot where wastage is, and sometimes it's best focus in a small area, move something along quickly, and then you actually get momentum to actually do the longer term aspects. And I'll pass along to Peter to see if he's got anything to add to that.
I sort of echo that as well, Tony. It's sort of, it is looking for some of those low-hanging fruit, as you call them, and some of the visual ones are always good. I mean, doing things like your lighting, we did that. You know, there's reasonably good paybacks on that. It's a nice visual aid if you're changing old lights to LEDs, etc. So it gets people on that sort of mentality of energy efficiency. We have looked at various things on site. Often you get focused on the large users, but sometimes they're often quite efficient because you've normally done that work beforehand because they're a large user on your site, so they've naturally had that focus. So sometimes it is the smaller things like the lighting, etc., where you can make a percentage for the site may be small, but it is a step forward, and any reduction is good. And if you can do those sort of things that are a bit more visible to the guys on the plant, it does help bring other ideas out sometimes.
Eoin, would you like to jump in here as well?
Yeah, just a couple of things to add to that. I think it's always good to have a fresh pair of eyes and to bring someone who's independent and not really stuck in the day-to-day operations is always a good thing to have that independent view. But the other thing I think is I'm sure everyone's financial director or accountant on a business will be able to tell you exactly where the inefficiency is, because inefficiency costs money. And if you can start to reduce the inefficiency and you start to reduce the impact that has on the pocket, then that's probably a good place to start. Because whether that be in energy or resources, inefficiency is a costly way to run your business. So I think those elements would be a useful point, a starting point. I just wanted to, sorry, Flora, before you get rid of me, just to follow up on the question that was asked about where do we start in terms of a circular economy, and I did start to put things about asking questions, but I think this is aligning with this particular question, that if you can start engaging and asking questions with your wider supply chain, you'll start to find find out what the challenges are with that supply chain, whether from your customers or your own suppliers. And if you can look at the operations, the facilities, the capabilities that you have as a business to answer those or to respond to those challenges, then that is the starting point to have that kind of collaborative conversation going forward. So it's something to consider in both in this context and in circularity context.
I'll just make one last statement before we close the meeting. Taking up Eoin's point on the finances, absolutely get the finance people involved. Sorry, the coffee machine's going in the background. So, yeah, the finances are absolutely key. What we found is that energy, almost, because if it's inefficient, you actually get maintenance savings, production savings, quality improvements, and they sometimes could be more valuable or hit home harder within the organisation. So really explore beyond what you're first looking at. And I think with that, Flora, we've hit the 11:30. Is that okay? Yeah. So I think we'd like to bring that to an end, and hopefully see some of you this afternoon at David Duke's session on carbon capture, utilisation and storage. Thanks a lot.
Thank you all.
Lovely, thank you. Cheers.
Cheers.